Hello and welcome to Skyline. I'm Driti Atri. Tonight, the whole West Asia, it is once again sitting on a power keg. America is issuing warnings. Iran is issuing threats. Israel is preparing for more confrontation, while China is building weapons that could challenge the US dominance. Russia is openly backing India against the Western pressure, and a shocking aviation accident in Germany. It is raising fresh questions about aircraft safety. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is not calming down. It is becoming more unpredictable by the day. And as these stories unfold, millions of people, including Indians living abroad, they are just watching very closely because what happens in these conflict zones, it can affect the global oil prices, jobs, travel, trade, and even the international security. Tonight, we bring you 8 major stories that show how rapidly the geopolitical landscape is now changing. So let's start with our first segment. Well, first of all, here is America's biggest warning. 14 countries are now under travel alert. Can you imagine planning a vacation, booking your tickets, packing your bags, and then suddenly receiving a warning from your government saying, think again? Well, this is exactly what is happening right now. The US has issued one of its boldest travel advisories in recent months. In fact, covering 14 countries and territories across the West Asia. And it is not a routine advisory at all. This warning comes at a time when the whole region is witnessing rising military tension, growing fear of retaliation, and concern that a local conflict, it could quickly become a regional one. Here the US says that the security situation, it remains highly unpredictable. In simple words, nobody knows what could happen next. Countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, in fact Kuwait, Jordan, the UAE remain under a level 3 advisory. That means Americans are being told to reconsider travel. And in the meantime, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza and Yemen, these places are under the highest warning possible, level 4, do not travel. And what does that mean and why it matters so much? Because the travel advisories, they are not just about tourism. They reflect how governments assess the security risk and how seriously they view the possible threat on the ground. So when Washington is issuing a warning of this scale, it definitely signals growing concern about possible attacks, military escalation, disruption to transportation network, and threat to civilians. Airlines, businesses, and multinational companies, they often monitor these advisories very closely because they can actually affect operations and the employee travel. And there is another layer to this story. The whole West Asia sits at the heart of global energy market. Any instability there, it can send shockwaves across the world. In fact, oil prices, shipping routes, air travel and supply chain, all can be affected. Here, investors, they are already watching the whole region completely and very carefully because even a small escalation, it could create uncertainty in global market. For now, the message from Washington, it's simple. Be very careful because the whole region, it remains on the edge. Now, speaking of the rising tension, one of Iran's most powerful voices has now issued a warning that is creating headlines across the Gulf. So let's move to our next story. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens when a senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, he publicly tells America's allies not to trust Washington? Well, you get a statement that sends shockwaves across West Asia. And that is exactly what kind of happened this week. Mohsen Razi, one of Iran's most influential political figures and a long-time figure within Iran's security establishment, delivered some of the strongest warning heard since the tension escalated. Well, his message, it was directed at America's Gulf partners, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and others too. According to him, countries that supported Israel should not assume that the US will always protect them. Now, that statement alone, it attracted global attention because it directly challenges the security arrangements that have shaped the Gulf region for decades. But then came an even more controversial remark. He referenced sensitive territorial issues including Abu Dhabi and Kuwait, topics that government usually avoid discussing publicly, and suddenly what was already a tense regional atmosphere that became even more uncomfortable. Why? Because territorial disputes, they are among the most sensitive issues in the international politics. Once they enter the public debate, emotions rise quickly and diplomatic relationships, they can become strained. In fact, he also claimed that if certain military actions had taken place inside Lebanon, Iran would have responded with overwhelming force. Now, whether that was a warning or maybe a prediction, that remains unclear, but one thing is certain. The language coming from Tehran this time, it is becoming increasingly aggressive. And the Gulf nations, they are paying very close attention here. Many of these countries host important American military facilities and play a very important role in global energy exports. Because in this region, words often carry strategic meaning. And yes, while political leaders exchange warning, another controversy is unfolding involving Kuwait, Iran, and the US. A controversy centered around a deadly airport attack. So here's what really happened. One airport, one deadly incident, two completely different stories. And now the truth, it has become a battlefield of its own. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest dispute, it involves Kuwait International Airport, basically a location that suddenly became the center of a global geopolitical controversy. The attack left one person passing away. In the meantime, dozens were injured. Important infrastructure was damaged. Airport operations, they were reportedly disrupted as emergency crew rushed to secure the whole area and assess the extent of the destruction here. Almost immediately, accusations began flying. Israel claims that the destruction, it was linked to a malfunction involving an American-made Patriot missile defense system. Here, the US says that this claim is completely wrong, false. According to the US Central Command, Iran carried out a deliberate drone attack. Washington insists that there was no malfunction at all. And in the meantime, Tehran rejects that explanation too. The world is definitely watching two competing narratives unfold. Who's telling the truth? Well, at this stage, investigators are still examining the whole evidence, but what makes this story so important is the timing. The region was already struggling to maintain a fragile ceasefire, right? This incident, it threatens to reignite tensions and undermine the ongoing diplomatic efforts. Well, it also raises questions about air defense readiness, regional security coordination, and the risk facing civilian infrastructure. Airports, they are not just transportation hub, are they? They are symbols of economic activity and international connectivity. So any attack on such a facility, it creates fear far beyond the immediate damage. And perhaps, most importantly, it reminds us how quickly misunderstandings or maybe accusations, they can escalate into something much bigger. Because once trust disappears, diplomacy becomes much more harder. And yes, while Gulf tensions, they continue to rise, another incident has triggered outrage in Europe. Basically, a ceasefire that had barely begun. It has struck a tragedy. Now let's look at a story here. A ceasefire is supposed to stop violence, right? Not create a new victim. Yet, that is exactly why this latest incident has caused such an anger. In southern Lebanon, the Miguel de Cervantes UN peacekeeping base, it came under the attack. And you know the consequences? Devastating. Two Spanish peacekeepers, they were injured. A Serbian peacekeeper lost his life. And suddenly questions emerged about whether the ceasefire was truly holding or not. Now the timing could not have been worse. The attack happened less than 24 hours after a ceasefire announcement. And that is why international concern grew so quickly. Here many observers had hoped the ceasefire would actually mark the beginning of a calmer period along the Israel-Lebanon border. Instead, this particular incident, it has raised fear that the whole situation remains dangerously unstable. In the meantime, Spanish Prime Minister Mr. Pedro Sanchez, he reacted very strongly. He demanded accountability. He called for full compliance with the ceasefire agreement, and he insisted that those responsible must be identified. Spain currently has hundreds of personnel serving as a part of UN peacekeeping mission. Now, for many Spanish families, this is no longer just a distant conflict. Their soldiers, they are directly involved. The United Nations Peacekeeping Force has long served as a buffer between conflicting sides, basically helping monitor ceasefires and prevent a wider clash. So when peacekeepers, they themselves come under the attack, it sends a worrying message about the security environment on the ground. This incident, it also highlights a larger reality here. Peace agreements, they can be signed overnight, but trust, that takes much longer to build. One attack, one miscalculation, one violation, and months of diplomatic work, it can suddenly come under a lot of pressure. And as Europe reacts to events in Lebanon, another major power is quietly preparing for future conflict. This time the focus, it shifts east towards China and a missile that is making military planners nervous. For years, the United States enjoyed a major advantage in the skies. Its fighter jets, surveillance aircraft, military support planes operated with confidence across vast distances. But China is now working aggressively to change that equation. A new missile reportedly under development, known as the PL-16, it is drawing a lot of attention from military analysts around the globe. Well, according to reports, this next generation air-to-air missile, it can have a range exceeding 300 kilometers. That means Chinese fighter jets may be able to target the enemy aircraft from much farther away than before. And these are not just any aircraft. The missile, it is reportedly designed to threaten the high-value assets such as airborne warning system, intelligence gathering aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers. These aircrafts, they are often described as the backbone of modern air operation because they help the fighter jets stay in the air longer duration and see the threats from the great distance. Here, analysts, they believe that the PL-16, it could eventually be integrated into China's advanced J-20 stealth fighter and the upcoming J-35 fighter. And wait, if that happens, well, Boeing's ability to project power across the Indo-Pacific, it could grow significantly. Well, here military planners in Washington, they are watching these developments very closely because, let's be honest, air superiority, it has always been one of America's biggest strengths. The concern is not about one missile here, it is about a broader pattern. China is investing heavily in advanced military technology, modernizing its armed forces and preparing for future conflict. Here the message, it is becoming increasingly clear. Well, the race of military dominance in Asia is escalating now. And yes, while China focuses on future battles, Russia's president, Mr. Vladimir Putin, he is focusing on a different issue. He is focusing on India, India's growing importance on the global stage. Now, let's move to our next story. I have a question. Can the world's most populous country be forced to choose sides? Well, according to Mr. Vladimir Putin, the answer is a clear no. Speaking publicly in St. Petersburg, the Russian president delivered a very strong defense of India and Indian Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi. Mr. Putin, he argued that attempts to pressurize India over its relationship with Russia, it is simply unrealistic. His remarks come at a time when Western nations continue to impose sanctions on Moscow and encourage the countries just to reduce the economic ties with Russia. Yet, India has maintained a very strategic approach here, continuing to engage with multiple global powers while pursuing its own national interest. Here, Mr. Putin emphasized that a country with population of more than 1.5 billion people will make a decision based on what benefits its own citizens, not what foreign governments demand. In fact, he also highlighted the rapid growth in trade between India and Russia. Energy, fertilizer, pharmaceuticals, and other sectors have contributed to stronger economic ties in recent years. Mr. Putin, he also suggested that bilateral ties could soon reach the $100 billion mark. This particular comment, it underlines Moscow's confidence that relationship with New Delhi, it will remain strong despite the international pressure. But for India, this reflects, well, maybe a broader foreign policy approach, maintaining relationship with competing global powers while avoiding direct alignment with any single bloc here. Now, as competition between major powers intensify, India's role in global politics, that continues to grow. But while leaders, they discuss diplomacy and trade, tensions in West Asia are once again moving in the opposite direction. And our next story, it shows how dangerous the whole situation is now becoming. Well, just when many hoped that the whole region was moving towards calm, A new statement from Iran, it suggests the confrontation may be far from over. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, well, they have declared that resistance operation will continue until and unless foreign military forces leave the region. The statement, it is being viewed as one of the strongest signals yet that Tehran is not ready to back down. The comments, they come amid the continuing controversy surrounding the deadly incident at Kuwait International Airport. In fact, one Indian national was reportedly not anymore, and dozens of people, they were injured too. While Washington accuses Iran of carrying out a deliberate drone strike, Tehran strongly denies the responsibility and insists that a malfunctioning US Patriot missile system caused the whole destruction. In the meantime, the conflicting accounts, it has kind of created a lot of confusion and fueled fresh tension. The problem is that every new accusation, it increased the risk of escalation. Military officials, diplomats, in fact, intelligence agencies across the region, they are closely monitoring all the developments because, let's be honest, even a single miscalculation, it could trigger a wider confrontation. Global markets are also paying attention though. Any major conflict in the Gulf region right now, it can affect the oil supply, shipping routes, energy prices around the globe. And for millions of people, the concern is simple. How long can this cycle of threats and counter threats continue before something large happens? And yes, at the moment, nobody has a clear answer. And while geopolitical tension dominates the headlines, another shocking story is raising a lot of concern in the aviation world. Let me tell you what really happened here. Passengers expect turbulence in the air. They do not expect an aircraft to collapse while sitting at the gate. Yet that is exactly what happened in a dramatic incident at Frankfurt Airport. Basically, a Lufthansa Boeing 787 Dreamliner was reportedly preparing for a long-haul journey when its nose landing gear, it suddenly failed. Within moments, the front section of the aircraft, it dropped towards the ground, creating a very chaotic scene on the whole tarmac. In the meantime, video footage of the incident, it quickly spread online, attracting attention from aviation experts and travelers around the globe. In fact, several crew members and ground personnel, they were reportedly injured as emergency teams rushed to the scene. Well, the whole aircraft, it has since been grounded while investigators work to determine exactly what went wrong here. In the meantime, aviation safety authorities, they are expected to examine the maintenance record, technical system and operational procedures as part of an investigation here. Now, Boeing. This particular Boeing 787, it is one of the most advanced commercial aircraft in service today, and it is widely used by airlines across the globe. And that is why incidents involving the aircraft attract immediate scrutiny. While modern aviation remains one of the safest form of transportation, events like this, it reminds us that safety requires constant vigilance, in fact, rigorous inspection and strict maintenance standards. For now, passengers are left waiting for answers. Airlines are watching closely and investigators are searching for the cause of failure. And that could have ended much, much worse. And with that, we come to an end of today's Skyline. Ladies and gentlemen, from America's travel warning and Iran's growing threat to China's military ambition, Putin's message on India, escalating tension in the Gulf, and a shocking aviation incident in Germany. Today's headlines, it reminds us that the whole world is changing faster than ever. Every day brings a new crisis, a new confrontation and a new challenge for the global leaders. But it also reminds us why staying informed matters. Because these stories are not happening in isolation. They affect economies, they affect the energy price, international travel, security and the lives of ordinary people across the world. Thank you for joining me on Skyline. I am Driti Atri. See you in the next episode.